Welcome back to the report. Now in India, some are demanding that key events in the nation's past are wiped out of the history books. Using the hashtag Remove Mughals from the Books, they're trying to remove references to the dynasty that ruled the subcontinent in the 16th and 17th centuries. Sahab Maghrawi has this report.
The hashtag Remove Mughals from History went viral on Twitter last week. The demand for the Muslim dynasty to be erased from history books was top trending in India. The hashtag was started following a lecture by Human Resource Development Minister Smriti Irani. In her speech, she was critical that children were being taught from history a book which she claims misrepresents religious tensions in the country and insults Shivaji, a Hindu warrior king who many regard as a national hero. Smriti Irani is also a member of the ruling Hindu nationalist BJP party. The Mughal dynasty, which ruled India during the 16th and 17th centuries, left a lasting legacy on the country, consolidating Islam in South Asia and spreading Muslim arts and culture. The Muslim Empire has long been subject to criticism, mostly by Hindu nationalists. The hashtag calling for the deletion of history attracted over 40,000 tweets, having received as much opposition as it did support, with many bringing up the considerable contributions left behind by the Mughals, essentially making India the country it is today. Some of India's most famous monuments, including the Taj Mahal and the Red Fort, were built by the Mughals. India has a rich heritage of Mughal art and architecture, as well as food, clothing and industry. Ever since the hashtag surfaced, Twitter has seen an array of responses, ranging from sarcasm, clever humour, factual debates to inflammatory comments. One user tweeted that removing Mughals from history books was fine, just as long as they didn't remove them from restaurants. But on balance, in the battle of tweets between supporters and detractors of the Hindu nationalist organisation RSS, it appears unlikely that any deletion of history or altering of history books will happen anytime soon. Sahab Maghrawi, The Report.
Well, joining me to discuss this issue is Dr. Nitasha Kaul from the Department of Politics and International Relations at Westminster University. And we also are joined by writer Ruchika Sharma, who advocates that some of these changes should be made. Now, Ruchika, this is less about history and more about current-day politics and Hindu nationalism, isn't it?
Absolutely. There is a growing faction, the Hindus faction, which calls for cleansing of what they call as Muslim history and more representation for Hindus in history. So yeah, this is more to do with politics than anything else. And they consider history to be one of the channels through which they could find more representation for Hindus and their demand for what they call a Hindu Rashtra or a Hindu nation.
Okay. Dr. Kaul, is there any basis for the claim that kind of Mughals are overrepresented in the history books?
Well, it depends on who you ask, and I think it is quite clear to any sane-minded person who's engaging with this debate in India today that this is about the politics of politicization of historiography. This is about how history is written, and in effect, what the reason why Mughal history is problematic to them is because they identify that as conveying the idea that Muslims are not just people, are not just a foreign other, but have been part of the country's fabric for a long time. So this is a battle between the history of memory and the memory of history. And sadly enough, I mean, some of this, just the very hashtag deleting history sounds very Orwellian. It's like the memory hole. So
is there any chance that this could actually happen? Because it sounds like the people who are advocating this have taken on a battle on rather unfavourable ground, given that the huge contribution that the Mughals have made to the history of the subcontinent.
The contribution of Mughals is undeniable, and likewise, I mean, there are many different strands of history of various kinds of people that we have come to now recognize post-1947 as being part of the history of India. What the Hindu supremacist forces want to do is to resort to a very culturalist, primordial idea of nationalism and project backwards the idea of India that they seek to create backwards into history and say this is how it always was, and anything that doesn't fit with our sense of Hindu supremacy is an aberration and should be should be deleted. This has to be seen within the wider context of the debates around. There was recently this petition that Professor Sheldon Pollock, the Indologist and the scholar of Sanskrit, that he should be removed from his position because, in essence, Sanskrit and Indology should be made in India. It's part of the Make in India debate. So this really is a question of power, and the sad thing is that even while they may not be able to push forward these changes immediately, it is without a doubt the fact that they have so much support for such a regressive agenda is in a problem.
Okay. Ruchika, do you think they've got any chance of actually getting anywhere with this? I mean, it would be a huge kind of eradication from history. Now, it usually requires an extraordinarily extreme regime to be able to achieve that. I mean, the only kind of regimes that we can think about that have managed to do that kind of thing would be the Nazis or would be the apartheid regime in South Africa. Do you think there's any chance of that kind of thing happening here?
Well, not exactly, not in the near future, but I would also like to point out that the hashtag, although it takes a very extreme position, having less of Mughal history, medieval Indian history would also not be a bad idea at all, because I think the Mughal history in medieval Indian history enjoys an unprecedented position, and a lot of other histories, therefore, do not find mention in our school textbooks. And a large part of it is because of the dominance of North Indian history, North Indian politics over other parts of India. So, for example, in South, you have the Deccan Sultanates, which find no mention in our history textbooks at all. In the East, you have the Home Kings, again, finding no mention. The tribal history, in medieval India is grossly underrepresented. So even though removing Mughal history from books will be a huge erasure of an indelible part of the history of India. But I think having less of Mughal history is going to be a good idea, and is going to expose several other strands of medieval Indian history.
But if the argument is that there have been certain aspects of history that have been neglected, and this is a long-standing contest in any nation's history, that the oppressed classes or that women or that minorities have been neglected, the usual argument is to include them, not to exclude somebody else.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I do not support the exclusion. But like I said, if you ask somebody today in India about medieval Indian history, all that they would know is about the Mughals, which I think is an unhealthy trend to have. Having less of Mughal history and making Mughal history just one of the strands of medieval Indian history would be a more of a healthy view of medieval Indian history to have. And like I said, there are several other, several important parts of our medieval Indian heritage which is being lost, because all that everybody knows about today when it comes to medieval Indian history is either Delhi Sultanate or then, of course, the Mughal Empire.
Dr. Kaul, could this debate be turned in another direction? Could it be argued that there are things that have been perhaps neglected or overshadowed that should be given greater prominence without having to argue that some other things should be wiped out of the history books?
Sure, I think that is, I think, a separate conversation. I think that is a conversation about, what the history, what would make the history curriculum more representative, but that would not involve challenging any aspect of the curriculum as it exists today as being somehow less Indian or anti-Indian or going against the grain of the Indian civilization. So I have no doubt that the intention behind their arguments is not to make history more representative, but actually to make it less representative and to make it more more focused simply on a Hindu version of history. I would completely agree that, of course, there are various other parts of India, and Ruchika mentioned Ahoms and the the rulers of Adil Shahs and other rulers of southern India. Of course, history should be more representative. And in fact, from my experience, those things were in the history books. It just seems that sometimes they're not given the due attention that they deserve. But I don't think this debate is about that. This debate is about making the curriculum less representative rather than making it more more interpretive and more representative from the way in which the debate exists right now. It's actually more similar to, for example, in the UK when we have these debates about, the regressive forces that argue that we should be saying that the empire was a force for the good. I think that is a better parallel here because essentially it seeks to delegitimize the contributions of certain historical forces and say that doesn't belong within the country, and that is done for ideological and political reasons. And I think that would be a good comparison to this debate.
Is there something sort of amiss with the very terms of the debate as well, given that the kind of argument about the lines of descent of modern national states going back to the 16th or 17th century is, to say the least, complex and may well be invalid?
Absolutely, you're totally right. I mean, I think it's very sad that this is happening at a time when I think in most places in the world we are actually moving towards a recognition of how many of the entities, such as the nation state, that were through most of the 20th century seen as being, natural entities and that could be projected backwards in time, were actually constructions that from within specific contexts of the forces, of historical forces. So this is actually it's in a sense it's the recognition that what the nation state that came into being in 1947 cannot historically be projected backwards to exist throughout the millennia. That you have to recognize the processes of evolution and various historical forces that led up to the present, and not just project the present backwards. But I think the Hindu nationalist idea of the nation is very primordialist, and they just want to project it backwards and say that it isn't these various kinds of nationalisms that created the nation, but actually the nation always existed, and that is debate stopping.
Ruchika, isn't that the case, that we're seeing a projection back of a national entity into a historical period where it's simply not a relevant part of the discussion? I mean, we have this in Britain. There's various people that want to have us waving the Union Jack over parts of history when the Union Jack didn't exist.
Absolutely. I agree with you that, this is projecting it backwards. And medieval history is not the only part of history that they want to change. For example, there is a huge faction in India which actually believes that the Aryans were an offshoot of the Harappan civilization, that they did not come out of India, that there was no migration, that they were actually born here in India, and that they are, the rightful ancestors of the Hindu nation that they wish to create. So they're taking it, they're taking the history of the Hindu nation as backwards as the Aryans. And you're absolutely right. This is just, projecting the presentist claims, the present onto the past.
Okay, Ruchika Sharma and Dr. Kaul, thank you very much for joining us for that discussion, but I'm afraid we'll have to end it because it's the end of this episode of The Report. I want to thank all my guests on today's programme and to thank you for taking the time to watch. Now, you can keep up with us on Twitter by following @IslamChannelCA and by using the hashtag The Report. But for now, we'll leave you with scenes of floods that submerged parts of Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma and Arkansas. Schools have been closed, power lines are down in some areas, roads are blocked and families have been evacuated. And the rain is forecast to continue for a few days more. Well, until tomorrow at the same time, good night.